Exploring the intricacies of Virginia's road to adult use, this is Season 1 of the Cannabis Capital Show with John Lunsford, brought to you by Golden Piedmont Labs.
Hi, this is Cannabis Capital with John Lunsford. I'm your host, John Lunsford, and I'm here with my guest, Ankur Rungta, the CEO of C3 Industries, and I'm also joined, as always, by my co-host and sponsor, Steve Mize, who's the president of Golden Piedmont Labs, which is a Virginia-based hemp processor. We're here to talk today about the issues with the road to adult use in Virginia. And it's interesting because New York just granted its first adult licenses, and at the same time is getting national attention for the chaos that happens when decriminalization happens too far in advance of legal adult use. In fact, the last week, the Times called it a free-for-all of unlicensed weed. So, Steve, first of all, from your perspective, do you see that possibility happening in Virginia?
Yes. Ankur, thanks again for, joining us on the show. And we're kind of trying to share with Virginians what other people have gone through. And so if we could start out, if you could just tell us, the states that you're in, because that's our goal, is to be a vertically integrated provider. And we're hoping Virginia can avoid some of the pitfalls that some of the other states have gone through. So just whatever you feel like you could share, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, no, happy to do that. Thanks for having me on, Steve and John. It's a good conversation, I think, at the right time. So just as a bit of background, I'm the CEO of C3 Industries. We are a multi-state operator in the cannabis space. Our company is based in Michigan. We're headquartered in Ann Arbor. That's where most of our corporate team is located. We're active today with operations in 4 states, Michigan, Massachusetts, Missouri, and Oregon. We've got about 600 employees total. We operate 19 stores today. We've got a bunch more in the pipeline there. And we've got about 250,000 square feet of cultivation and processing space that we operate with additional facilities in development. We are expanding as well into 3 new states, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Illinois. We're developing assets in those markets right now, and we'll look to get operational either late in 23 or early in 24. So, licenses in 7 markets effectively. And just by my personal background, I was a corporate lawyer and investment banker before I started this company. I worked in New York at a law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell, and then I worked at Moelis and Company on the investment banking side. And so, bring a pretty deep background in the corporate finance world. Definitely closely study, policy considerations in the various markets that we're in, including and also at the federal level. So, I think I have a pretty solid perspective on different markets and how they've approached the regulation of cannabis. Just to touch on John's point on New York, I think you are seeing there, some of the challenges that can arise when there is not a functioning licensed marketplace and a licensed alternative for consumers, and you do have decriminalization, and so that's a very ripe environment for the illicit market to sort of even grow from where it already exists today in this country. And so to me, it's always about, for regulators, it's about finding the right type of framework and regulatory environment that allows the licensed market to thrive, gives consumers an exciting alternative to the illicit market. I think at the end of the day, the illicit market and the licensed market are competing, and so for the licensed market to be successful, it has to be able to compete with the illicit market. And so that can mean things like price, that can mean things like product quality, certainly the safety of the products and the testing of them, and the safety of the environment that people are acquiring the products in is a big differentiator. But at the end of the day, the regulatory framework in each state has such an impact on the cannabis marketplace that it's really where everything starts. And I think all state regulators would really I think it'd be smart to really think about that as they're crafting the regulatory framework for a state.
I think everybody kind of goes through the same process. And in Virginia, one of the first things that everybody wants to talk about are the number of licenses. Some of the states have a tremendous number of licenses. Some of them, it's just a small number that they're starting out with and moving to more. So if you could kind of start out, tell us the pros and cons of the 4 states you're in and how that has worked with, and the number of licenses that you would suggest in order to make it viable, but also to get rid of the illicit market.
Sure. Yeah, look, I think we've seen a variety of different frameworks in the states that we're in, and so uh, again, I think we've got a pretty broad perspective on these things. We started our business in Oregon and then in Michigan. Those are the first two states that we operated in. Both of those states have no state level license caps, meaning there's theoretically an unlimited number of licenses that can be issued in those states. Regulation is really left to the municipalities to determine how they want to allow cannabis through zoning and other sort of local powers. And so, as a result, what's happened in those markets is you have had a lot of oversaturation that's developed, both on the product side and the retail side. And so, I think those are examples of one end of the spectrum where regulators made a decision to create a very open marketplace. It's certainly, I think, consistent with how we generally view industries in this country and generally sort of our capitalistic approach to things, meaning we don't typically pick winners and losers. We allow the marketplace to decide, who has a viable business plan and actually is offering something differentiated to consumers. I think that there's a reason that many states choose not to go to an open marketplace, and we've seen that in places like Missouri, where we operate now, where there are a fixed number of licenses at the state level. I think some states make the policy decision that they don't want to have a fully open marketplace, that they want to create either merit based or other criteria and set a specific number of licenses. And that way, there's some, kind of selection process that happens, and licenses aren't just granted to anyone who seeks them. And so that, I think, isn't how we often regulate industries in this country, but around cannabis, I think it can make a lot of sense because I think without any regulation or any limits, it does tend to get oversaturated over time, and that can have a really sort of detrimental impact on the businesses in that marketplace. And so, I always preach balance. I think that there are pros and cons to a fully open marketplace, and there are pros and cons to a very restrictive marketplace. To me, what I've found over time is really being kind of balanced and in the middle is the right place to be. And by that, I mean there should be some limits on number of licenses at a state level, and there should be some merit based or other requirements in order to get those licenses. But it also shouldn't be such a small number or such a few number of licenses that it doesn't allow for an attractive marketplace to develop. And so by that, I mean, if there's so few licenses, then you see very high consumer prices, you see a lack of product innovation, and you really ultimately see a licensed marketplace develop that will not really be able to compete in many ways with the illicit marketplace. And so, what that exact number should be is really a state by state analysis. I think it should be tied to population. I think it should be tied to the policy preferences of those legislators, meaning different states may have different views on how accessible they want to make these products, but generally I think finding a middle ground that allows for a really kind of attractive marketplace to develop for consumers, while not creating a total free for all in an oversaturated business environment. I think that's really the key, is to find that middle ground.
So, in the states that you're in, you said you're in 4 states. Are you completely vertical in all 4 of those states, or are some of those states just a grow license or a retail license? Give us an idea of where you are on that and what different states are using. Are they doing all verticals or each individual?
So our typical model is to be vertical in the markets that we operate in, and that's what we've done up to this point. It's not required in these markets that we're in. It's just the choice that we've made, and we've either applied for and won those licenses, or in some limited cases we've acquired them. We like the vertical business model. We like to have a presence. If we're going to be in a market operating, we like to have a presence both on the production side and the retail side. There are a number of benefits that come from that, we think. And so I'm not, I don't know that I have a strong perspective that the states should mandate companies being vertical. I'm fine with states that issue different licenses in different categories. I think again, if you're going to, if you're going to sort of engineer a number of licenses in whether you're having a vertical requirement or not, I think the key is to think about how will that impact the market that's going to develop there. And so on the product side of things, will there be enough supply? Will there be product innovation? Will the price of the products get low enough to be attractive for consumers? Will there actually be a wholesale marketplace? There's a lot of states that allow companies to not be vertically integrated, but what ends up happening is a very small number of companies will end up controlling all of the retail or most of the retail, and so then you don't really have a wholesale marketplace. So a standalone cultivator or processor in one of those states may have a very challenging time because most of the retail is owned by their competitors already. And so I think in whichever path the state is going to go down, they really need to always be thinking about the market implications, because nothing defines the product marketplace and the competitive environment in a state more than that regulatory framework. That is the key, in my mind, the key driving factor for how that marketplace will then develop. And so I think it's really important for these legislators, for their staff, to be trying to consult with the industry, to be maybe trying to consult with the experts to understand what are the economic implications of the different approaches that they're considering.
Steve, Ankur, actually, I'm curious about Oregon because it's been legal for 20 years there, and the prices are certainly low. I think everybody would agree with that. And yet, the illegal production is rampant, right? There are a lot of stories. Public safety, it's a real issue in Oregon. Yeah. How did that happen, and what can Virginia learn from that?
I think Oregon is maybe a bit of a unique case in that there's a lot of legacy cannabis production there. There's a lot of outdoor production and greenhouse production there that can sometimes lend itself to some of that illicit activity. But look, I think ultimately one of the main problems you had there is you had too many cultivation licenses given out, and you had a massive oversupply of product, and so that created a lot of pressure on those businesses to do something with that product. And so it's not surprising to see a lot of illicit activity when you have that type of oversupply and overproduction, because people often just do it out of desperation. And so I think this goes back to my view that a fully open marketplace also has real drawbacks and can create a business environment that isn't very healthy. It's certainly great for consumers in Oregon. Consumer pricing is very low. There's great product selection, product innovation. But again, it's a balance in my mind. You're not just solving for consumer pricing and product availability. You're trying to also, I think, create, at least if I were a regulator, I'd want to create a stable long-term business environment. And so, again, this just goes back to how do you balance these different considerations out, and how do you really think about being thoughtful about, the number of licenses and how you structure the marketplace. I'll give an example. I think Missouri has done a phenomenal job of it. Missouri is a state, was, recently just medical for the last couple of years. They did just pass an adult use ballot initiative a few weeks ago, which we're very excited about as industry participants there. If you look at their market, about, I think, roughly 6.5 million people as a population. They allowed about 60 cultivation licenses and just around 200 retail licenses. And so it's certainly not a market that's as restrictive as Virginia, let's say, in terms of number of licenses. But it's also not so wide open that the marketplace is very chaotic. And so what you have is already in a very short period of time, in 2 years, consumer prices are quite low there, and you've got great product quality and great innovation. But you also have a healthy business environment where producers and retailers can generate a decent margin, can run a high quality business. They're not forced to sort of reduce the quality of what they're doing because of margin pressure. And so in my mind, you've got that great healthy balance of a strong consumer marketplace, but also a great business environment. And now with the transition to recreational, I think it's going to continue in that same fashion, where there's enough supply and competition to make it really exciting for consumers, but it's also a strong business environment where we think we can build a long-term profitable business. And so, if I were going to point regulators to any state, I would say look at a state like Missouri. I think they've got an interesting approach and a healthy marketplace.
Yeah. So it brings to the next thing, when we're talking about the number of licenses, affects the price. There's also the big thing with Virginia as we move into a regulated market of the taxes. And so that's the thing on all the General Assembly members' minds. How do we tax this? I mean, there's a 30% states, and then there's just regular taxes, and then there's no taxes on medical whatsoever.
Yep.
So, with the different states that you're in, give me an idea of taxes and what you think has worked and hasn't worked.
Yeah, I think to your point, there's a wide range of different approaches that states are taking on this. You know, I definitely think that it's okay to look at this industry as a source of new tax revenue. I think that's how we treat, other comparable industries. Think tobacco, think alcohol, healthcare, et cetera. And so I think that there's a place for that. I think that you're going to hear me say this a lot. I think it's about balance again, right? And so if you go too harsh on your taxes, then you can sort of smother the licensed marketplace, and you can really give a boost to the illicit marketplace. I think the example I like to give to people is I often compare Michigan and Illinois, right? Two states that are rec. Illinois is about 13 million people, I believe, or maybe it's 12 and a half or something. Michigan's right around 10. Michigan has actually got a much larger current run rate marketplace. We're at about $2.5 billion run rate of overall revenue. Illinois is, I think, around 1.8 or something like that. And I believe that program started a little earlier than Michigan. And the reason that my view on why that's the case is, one, much fewer licenses. So you have that issue of competition not being as fierce, higher consumer prices. So just less adoption into the licensed market, and then very high taxes, right? And so we see folks coming from Illinois into Michigan to purchase cannabis, right? Which, if you think about that, I mean, it's pretty unusual. And so I think that, again, taxes have an impact on this stuff. And so I think there's always a desire when you have a new source of revenue as a legislator to, particularly when it's this type of a product, to really try to maximize that. But again, I think it can have other negative implications that may not be what people are looking to accomplish. And so I would say it's okay to have an additional tax on cannabis, but if it gets too large, then you're going to have some of the same issues that we've been talking about.
So, who do you feel like is your biggest competitor right now? I mean, I know you're dealing with the taxes and those issues and, the overgrowth, but you're also competing directly with the illicit market.
Yeah.
So, kind of give me an idea, where, if you're sitting down for your board meeting, who are you competing against? Are you talking to them about the illicit market and trying to get a bigger share from them, or the other legal? I mean, just kind of put the things we've talked about together and let us know where that goes.
Yeah, I think I view it. I view really it all in one spectrum. I mean, they're both my competitors, my licensed competition as well as the illicit market. And I'm not a. I don't. I really believe that we will win or not win through competition and through differentiation. Meaning, I'm not of the mindset that there should be really harsh enforcement of the illicit market. I think there should be some enforcement, but I don't think it should be, heightened or more harsh. I think it's really on our kind of, it's on us in the license market to make our offering more attractive for consumers than what the illicit market offers. And I think if we're able to do that over time, then we should be very successful. And if we're not, then consumers will tell us that. And so I think that my competition is both. I think the way I look at it is, from a brand standpoint, we're trying to build long-term brands in the space that really resonate with consumers, that stand for high quality, that stand for sort of differentiated products that people can't get elsewhere. And so, to me, I do feel like I'm competing with the illicit market more there, because that's really where you find those products today. There are very few licensed brands that really have resonated more broadly with cannabis consumers out there. And so I would like to build brands over time that have that type of resonance and brand equity in the market. I think in my retail business, I'm really competing with everybody, meaning I'm competing with my licensed retail competitors that are operating similar businesses in these states, trying to create a better and more exciting offering for consumers than they are. And then again, I'm also competing with the illicit market. If in Michigan, in this macro environment, people are very value oriented, consumers, I mean. And so if they have better options outside of the licensed market, then they're gonna avail themselves of that. And so I really view it as both. And um, I think a lot of people in the licensed market get hung up on the fairness argument of, hey, we're incurring all these costs, we're complying with all these regulations, and it's so unfair that there's an illicit market out there that we have to compete with. I really don't view it that way. I think any company that enters this industry should understand that there's a 50 plus year legacy market that exists, and again, it's our job to offer something that's more attractive for consumers relative to that. And I think the challenge becomes when the regulators don't allow a business environment to develop that allows you to compete with the illicit market. So that's where there can be some challenges. But even then, I think those businesses, they still have a responsibility to try to compete and to try to create something that's more attractive. And I think that should be the focus for operators in this space.
Well, as you and some of our listeners may or may not realize, Virginia's had medical marijuana now for the last couple of years, and it's been regulated by the Board of Pharmacy. And now we're looking to go into full, adult retail. Um, some of our folks are a little bit nervous about going into full retail, although right now you can get your license with your big toe being hurt, as you've probably seen in some of the original markets in like Colorado when they first started. So tell us your opinion on the medical versus, what's going on with full retail and how you think those should work together. And I guess start out by telling us where you have retail versus medical.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of our markets are now, approved for adult use. Missouri was the last one that was medical only, and that just, as I mentioned, that happened a few weeks ago. And so all the markets that we are in are heading in that direction or already there. My take on this is that medical programs are a good way for states to sort of dip their toe in and sort of start to understand what it's like to have a licensed cannabis marketplace. I think that in my mind, and it may be controversial to say this, but you have a lot of overlap between your medical patient base and your adult use customer base. A lot of folks that use cannabis are doing it for multiple reasons, and there may not be a fully defined medical reason that they're doing it for, but maybe they have trouble sleeping, maybe they have trouble with appetite, maybe they have trouble with anxiety, and so but they may also enjoy relaxing on a Sunday afternoon as well, right? It may not be so clear cut, what's driving their desire to use cannabis, or what their alternatives are. Maybe it's to avoid prescription drug use, maybe it's to avoid alcohol use, right? And so I think that you can't really draw black and white lines between medical and adult use of cannabis. I think there's a lot of overlap, and I think that once you have a medical licensed marketplace and it's functioning well, and you've wrapped your arms around it, I don't think there needs to be a lot of fear over that transition to adult use. It's ultimately it's the same supply chain, it's the same products. It's, as I said, in many cases, an overlapping group of customers at the end of the day. And I think some of the horror stories that that legislators fear, in terms of crime or increased usage of cannabis by minors or other vulnerable populations. I think a lot of that stuff has really not come to kind of play out that way in other states. And I think Colorado's a state that's done a ton of research in these areas, and so those negative effects or externalities just don't seem to be there. And so I have no problem with the state wanting to explore medical first and then later move into adult use. I think states have the right to their own policy considerations and process like that, and not every population in the U.S. in different states is going to feel the same way about these issues. But generally, I think that there's a little bit of too much fear around that transition. And there's just we're 20 states into this thing now. It's pretty obvious that there's a smooth way to do it, and I think. But I think where some of the complexity comes in, and this is, I know you are very focused on, Steve, is the medical marketplace is inherently smaller than the recreational marketplace. And so how do you properly supply that recreational marketplace? To me, a state like Virginia has to consider new licenses as part of this process. There just will not be enough supply, enough retail availability. And if they just left the existing framework in place, I think they're going to end up with a pretty stunted marketplace. And it's going to leave a strong illicit marketplace for all the reasons that we've talked about. And so, certainly, as I look at Virginia, very kind of large population, fast growing. I think that the legislators should be thinking a lot about how do we really make it an exciting industry, an exciting marketplace for its consumers. And to me, new licenses are going to have to be part of that equation.
Ankur, one thing you said was interesting is that I noticed Missouri last week went adult use, as you pointed out. Missouri is a pretty conservative state. I think it's Republican controlled, if I remember correctly. And Virginia is sort of a split. You've got the Democrats controlling the Senate and the Republicans controlling the House and a Republican governor. And there's been a push and pull, as you know. And so it's not clear what's going to happen. Obviously, there are a lot of people with hopes that something's going to get resolved sooner or later. But let's say it doesn't get resolved. You touched on it a little bit, but in terms of public safety, when I mean public safety, I mean restricting access to minors, I mean testing so that people don't put bad things into their system, and just the general criminality that goes around illicit activity. If they keep the status quo, I mean, is there any going back? Does it look? And Steve, I'd like your answer on this too. I mean, does it end up looking like New York, and you try to get the horse back in the barn, and it's too late?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think one, just to touch on your point on Missouri, it's fascinating. The Republican, there was a Senate race as well on this, on November 8th in Missouri, and the Republican candidate won that race by I think 15 points. And on the same ballot, cannabis passed. I think it was 54-46 or something like that. So there was something like a 15-20 point different outcome, in terms of that Senate race relative to the ballot initiative. And so I think this idea that, that it's a partisan issue is really, I think there's less and less evidence to support that. I think there's a lot of support for cannabis broadly in this country. And I think that's important for Republicans in Virginia to think about, because I think that they're, in their own political considerations around their base, I think there's more support there maybe than they sometimes give credit to. And then in terms of, Virginia and what they do here, I mean, I do think that, look, they don't have to do everything at once. There can be multiple bites at the apple here in terms of over time expanding access. But I do think that they have a critical sort of, set of choices as they first launch this marketplace here. And if they don't want to be complaining and worrying about why the license market isn't doing as well relative to the illicit market in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, I think now is the time to really take some bold action. And again, I think that if the fear is if they open it up too wide, then there'll be too many of these businesses or too much. They don't want it on every street corner, or that's the mentality. I think there are a lot of ways to balance it out. You don't have to go to an Oregon or Michigan. There are many middle grounds that are possible. And certainly, to speak, about a group like Steve's, I mean, if you're already an operating hemp business in the state, it seems like sort of a no-brainer to, create a path for those companies to participate in this marketplace. Again, just if the goal is to get it up and going quickly, to have there be a lot of product supply and kind of good sort of competition and pricing for consumers, then that seems like a very quick and viable way to go. So I do think that this isn't their only chance, but this is a major chance to get it right. And I think that you give the industry the right momentum out of the gate, and that can really pay huge dividends over time.
So let's concentrate on Missouri for a second. John brought up Missouri is a somewhat conservative, more Republican-leaning state, similar to Virginia. So if you were going to give some of the folks in Virginia some advice, being a very similar state, what do you think that Missouri did well, and what do you think specifically, if they're modeling this after Missouri, that they should avoid, as far as pitfalls that you think maybe we could improve on?
Yeah, look, I think Missouri, I think the framework was put together in a pretty thoughtful way for both medical and adult use in terms of the number of licenses relative to the population and the overall demand in the market. And so that's why you now see a market that's, in my mind, that sort of balanced marketplace that everyone should be looking for, meaning it's good for consumers. There's, kind of broad availability of product. There's reasonable prices at retail. The taxes aren't overwhelming. So it's a very attractive environment for consumers. You've seen a huge amount of adoption there as a result. So people are leaving the illicit market, coming into the licensed market because of those dynamics. And then on the flip side, you've got a business environment that's not so oversaturated that companies are failing or that margins are going down to an unsustainable level. And so it's really about, again, finding that balance between the interest of the industry and the businesses and that of consumers, and also your own policy considerations. As you note, Missouri is a conservative state. Missouri is still, I think, still in the process of getting comfortable with the idea of licensed cannabis. And so I think they did a really nice job of thinking about both sides of the equation, and really allowing for a healthy marketplace to develop as a result. In terms of criticisms, I don't really, honestly, I don't know that I have a ton. I mean, I think there's been some, anytime you create a restricted marketplace, meaning a fixed number of licenses, you will have those who say, this was not open enough. This is not creating a broad enough set of opportunities for all different parts of of that state, or different groups or demographics within that state. I think that's always a challenge that states are going to have to deal with. This is a very social equity and these considerations are really prominent right now, and I think need to be thought about as well by legislators. And so I would also encourage a state like Virginia to think about that. In Missouri with rec, there's also these micro business licenses that have been created and are really designed to sort of broaden access and level the playing field a little bit for smaller businesses and aspiring entrepreneurs to enter the space. And so I do think that's something that Virginia should think about. Virginia is, it may be Republican leaning, but I think it's very moderate. I think there's a lot of different voices and constituencies. And so I think the broader support that you can get from people, the more buy-in that you can get from different groups, I think that, to me, the closer you can get to a consensus approach, the better in my mind. And so that's what I would say is try to create a healthy marketplace. Try to think about, if you are going to limit things, try to create the ability for lots of different people to get access, and not just the largest companies. And I think that's how you really get to something that can be broadly acceptable.
For Republicans and Democrats, Virginia is very bifurcated as far as, up outside of DC. It's a very metropolitan, big city kind of area. And the whole rest of Virginia is pretty much agricultural, probably somewhat similar to Missouri as
Sure.
well. Tell us a little bit about, farmer opportunities and a little bit more about these micro licenses, because I think Virginia is really interested in getting some of the farmers the ability to grow, although there is a concern about people stopping on the side of the road and picking weed and putting it in their
Sure.
trunk. So they're trying to play with that right now as far as making sure that everything is secure, but there's still opportunity. So just try to compare and contrast the security versus, the growth for the
Yeah.
farmers.
Yeah. I think the security piece, honestly, I put that into the bucket of sometimes there can be more fear than is, warranted around these things. I think if states have tight regulatory regimes with the right rules, the right requirements, you can avoid a lot of those games. Uh, I think most states are doing a good job of preventing whatever you want to call it, diversion from the licensed marketplace. I do think with outdoor farming, it's inherently a little less controlled and sort of more open to manipulation. But even then, I think with the right oversight, the right regulation, you can avoid a lot of that. In terms of access to farmers, I think that is something Virginia should really think about. If you look at states like Florida and Alabama, they are going down that road of creating extra points or bonus criteria related to history of farming in a particular state, certain farming capabilities. And so I think that there's a way that if Virginia created more licenses and put certain criteria related to farming around those licenses, that they could accomplish that goal. And again, I think in that vein of what I just said about creating broad support and consensus, I think it would be really smart to try to get folks from the traditional farming industry involved in this new industry, because just like you said, it's such a agriculture is such a key part of the Virginia economy that you never want to make traditional industry feel like it's being left out of this new opportunity.
That's a great point, Ankur. Because there are a lot of farmers in Virginia, and Virginia was built on wheat, just a different one.
Yeah, that's
So,
right.
from a historical point of view,
Absolutely.
I think we're going to have to shut it down there. Really appreciate your being on the show, Steve. As always, a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you
Look
so
forward
much.
to talking again soon.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Steve.
So,
It was a great discussion. I hope it was helpful.
thank
It
you. We
was.
really appreciate it. Take care, guys. Bye for now.